All right, so the title of my presentation is Performing Rhythm with Computer-Based Musical Instruments, and it'll focus mainly on one computer-based musical instrument that I created, which brings me to, I really found it useful to hear the last presenter's introduction of who they are, because I think it's pretty varied and mixed. So I'm primarily a composer, I guess, and an instrument designer and a researcher into musical instrument design. And I also perform with different systems, interactive systems, with my own music and with other people's music, which also I find interesting. So when I was asked to participate in this talk, in this workshop, I was immediately attracted to the subject because well, everybody has to deal with rhythm at some point, and the question is how you deal with rhythm, which also made me extremely puzzled about what would I have to say about rhythm in an articulate way. So most of the work that I have done has consciously drifted from traditional conceptions of rhythm where the beats are clearly stated and where meters are clearly stated. And in fact, I've been searching sort of for music where it is ambiguous and pleasure is derived from that ambiguity. So while there is a great body of computer music that does deal with rhythm in a very intentional way, or sort of, this is the hardest thing about talking about rhythm, but there is a body of computer music that focuses on rhythm and in rhythmic patterns of repetition. And this is not where I'm going. So I will try to start with two examples from the electronic era that for several reasons I've been dealing with in different contexts and classes that I've been working on. So the first one is Eliane Radik's, it's called Jules Riandre. I've never known how to pronounce this. And so let's listen to that for a second. And the second one is Morten Subotnik's an excerpt from the Silver Apples of the Moon. So after choosing these two sort of diverse pieces of electronic music, I realized that actually both of these composers were associated with NYU at some point in their lives, although the pieces weren't composed there. But the reason I chose them was not that. It was because their approach to rhythm for me needs the commitment of the listener to engage with the music and to try to find sense in the organization of time. So the way I've been thinking about these things is, of course, that sometimes it seems like the beat is in the music, and sometimes it seems like the beat is your responsibility, that is in the beholder, that is in the listener. And the idea is that in music that offers multiple ways of sort of hanging to the music, we are free to choose what we're focusing on at different times. And somebody already mentioned the different, harmonic rhythm and percussive rhythm. There's all these ways in which we can hang to different things, and of course, ambiguity or scale in this cases helps, right? So in the case of rhythmic, for example, there seems to be the scale is so large that you have to sort of impose a beat into the empty space. Or sometimes the very small, minute fluctuations in the large drone seem to suggest something, and then it's broken with the percussion instrument. So, sort of going back to the last ideas of the previous talk, that rhythm sort of has to be negotiated between the listener and the music. That you have to find your own way through what the music offers and impose your own deal, sort of negotiate what the music has and what you bring to it. And this is always fantastic when you see someone from a different culture dancing to the music of another culture. It's always strange. It's always surreal in a way, because you're imposing what you already know about music and what dance means to the music that you're hearing. So, what music and what instruments? And so, generally when we think of computer music, and I still haven't even defined where I'm going with that term, or with computer-based musical instruments. So when we think of electronic and computer instruments as opposed to acoustic instruments, and that's already a sort of a large grouping. So acoustic instruments are those where you're exerting mechanical energy and effort must be applied to an object to create sounds. But we're not just grouping them for a practical reason. So electronic and computer instruments are often designed to imitate acoustic instruments. So we have two cases here. The first one is instruments that follow sort of an acoustical mechanical model, and the keyboard synthesizers like these are very common in that. So these are sort of designed to imitate a regular keyboard, a piano. And then you also have instruments that are not designed with that in mind, but still try to imitate mechanical music, like the theremin, for example, with notable exceptions, of course. And so most people think of computer instruments for rhythm, or rhythm in computer music, as this sort of beat design, and in fact it doesn't say here, but some of them have like the rhythm designer section, and this is one of the early drum machines. So although the examples I have played are Western electronic contemporary music, the question that I'm trying to pose is not, or at least I hope it's not, about an aesthetic as much as a question of medium. So what is the music that could genuinely belong to a computer medium? What are the things that are native to the digital world? What are the instruments, in the largest possible sense of the word, that we need to play this music, right? So it's sort of a twofold problem. You have to define what music is native to the digital medium, and what music, and what instruments you need to play that. So one of the things that I found fascinating about designing instruments is that you literally design, and the process is you design an interface and then you design the behavior that that interface will have. And often the interesting thing is that you design something, then you perform, and then you go back and design again, and then you perform again, and this is a circle that leads the design process. Okay, so since you're gonna hear this live tonight, and also because I can give you any of these things, um, I'll just move on to sort of my final thoughts on this. So, while it's clear that these are not repeating patterns, there are repeating elements coming um, on and off at a rate of some sort, right? So, while I wouldn't be able to talk about clear examples of how these patterns are repeating, I am able to believe strongly that this is strongly rhythmic for me, at least as a performer. And I don't know that that translates onto you as listeners. But what I'm sort of calling a sort of an embodied approach to this sort of rhythmic performance is that I'm trying to use, so just to sort of point them in order, I have to do some kind of recognition and classification as a means to achieve difference, the different kinds of behaviors that the gestures have, and also and this difference is used to achieve time organization. And the recurrence of similar elements provoke a perception of rhythm of some sort. And I was particularly interested in the idea of these long cycles, right? And my question that I never quite got around to formulate well is if in these very long entities that are sort of huge gestalts, do you perceive smaller gestalts, right? And I guess this is similar with the huge differences that there could be, that there are all these smaller elements that we use to build, smaller elements of our vocabulary that we use to build our own perception of rhythm. And so I guess this is the idea that I've been trying to work on, the idea of rhythm at its bounds, right? Too fast or irregular to be rhythm in the traditional sense, but not quite fast enough or dense to be pitch or texture, or too slow to be rhythm, but too fast to be form. And these are the sorts of areas that I'm interested in exploring that I believe allow the listener to sort of negotiate its own or her own way through the music and sort of help me in organizing what seems a little bit chaotic. And so, yeah, that's my contact information, and I wonder if there are any questions. Thanks. Thank you. Yes?
So, you say, the music you're creating this way. Won't be recorded. You say that the music that you create in this way is definitely rhythmic for you, but you don't know if the rhythm comes through to the listener. And I wonder what you mean by that. I mean, do you mean you wonder if the listener perceives a beat or a meter? I mean, we say speech is rhythmic, right? But we don't necessarily perceive a beat in speech. So what do you mean when you ask that question as to whether the rhythm is coming through to the listener?
Well, I wonder to what extent people are perceiving this as a sort of patterning situation. Not in terms of meter or beat, which I don't think are clear, and I think those are the kinds of things that one sort of puts into this kind of music. I do wonder if people perceive this at some point as some kind of repeatingness of some sort, right? If we are returning to similar ideas, if we're returning to similar gestures, and if this is repeated, if this is perceived as some kind of patterning. Which I having done this for a while now, I sort of have that insider perspective, and I think I know what I'm doing, but I don't know if it comes through in that way.
Because as sort of an empirical, from an empirical perspective, right? I listen to you ask a question like that. I want to design an experiment so I can answer your question, but right. I wonder if you could formulate the question in clear enough terms that we could maybe do that.
Well, so one of the things that I was working on and hoping that I would be able to have that ready for here, and which didn't really work very well, was to try to translate, because I have all the control information as data that can be timed. And so I do have frame per frame what is happening in data. And I just couldn't get it to something that was reduced enough so that it would make sense to visualize or to analyze, but it's there, and it's certainly feasible to get it. I don't know if that would make things easier or worse.
Maybe worse, but you know, I mean, I would think, you know, just if you really want to know what's coming through the listener, you want to look at the sound that's coming out, not necessarily the data stream
and in
from
the
the
end,
controller.
And in the end, I think the way that I'm getting that is just by talking to people that have listened to the thing, and you know, just empathic conversations with other human beings, rather than lab experiments. That's been my approach so far.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, thanks very much. Two quick questions. Just when you assign these different behaviours, gestures and postures to the hand tracking software, just wondered what other decisions that you're making when you actually do that, because we can see and hear, but behind that, what you're looking for. And secondly, related to the previous question, that the first two composers you mentioned, Morton Subotnick and Elaine, I missed the surname.
Radik.
Radik, thanks. Did they say any more about this question of where the beat is perceived in the listener, within the composer, etc.? So yeah, two questions there. Your decisions when you assign the gestures and your original two examples.
So first about those composers, I don't know. I mean, I've seen stuff that they've written, but I've never heard them talk about that specific aspect. And in fact, it's very hard to pin down composers to talk about that sort of thing. Certainly in the case of Subotnick, he's using a machine that allows, like the Buchla synthesizer that has this sequencer. So I think he would be able to articulate it. I don't know if you've ever heard him talk about this. Yeah, so I would say that he would have to conceptualize this very well. So I guess it would be a question for him. And about the decisions, it's essentially going back to the idea that you negotiate these things with your own design, right? So you design something, you try it, then you design again, then you try, and it's a sort of a circle of design. The criteria that goes into each of these decisions are variety and sort of there are only a few paths that you can do to sort of move from one gesture into the next one. So you have to figure out what possible patterns of weaving you're going to be able to do. Also, for some reason, my right hand at least is far more agile and has faster reach, so I end up putting more things on the right hand for some reason. And so I've come to some personal decisions about how to map these things, which I feel it's an integral part of composing for these instruments.
When you perform this, do you draw attention to the visuals of it? Do you project?
I never projected, actually.
You don't?
Unusually projected. Sometimes I have, but yeah. I think it distracts sometimes from the. If I do, I always never put it in that size for sure. I would put it in a very very small size and close to me, so that it's a window, but it's not going to the movies.
One last question. Actually, it's very related to what you were saying right now. You think that it really changes the perception of the rhythm, looking at the visual part, or when actually the listeners can actually see your hands moving, changes completely the perception of the rhythm when you're just listening to the sound?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily the perception of the rhythm, but it's like I can't remember now the author of this marimba experiment, where the note is recorded and the gesture changes, but the recording is exactly the same. And one of the gestures is like that, and the other one is. And when it's used, when you see the visual information, you judge the longer gesture and as hearing it a longer note, when it's the exact same recording. And so in this particular case, I do think that the gestures, like in percussion, they're prepared. You have to go in some way and you have to go out in some way, and you have to weave things in a different way. So here, when you see it in that sense, when you see that image, which is a video capture, it's better because you can see sort of how the hands are moving. But when you see the computer analysis window, which is what I would generally project, you only see if the finger is inside or outside. So I think that might give you more information that you need to listen, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay. Thank you.